Welcome, everyone. This is our first episode of season 2. This is quite a big deal. Seth, we have someone else in the room here. What's going on tonight?
It's throwing me off a little bit. Even the balance of the Zoom screens is messing with my brain. But you know what, Scott? I think we were due for a little bit of a shakeup. I'm excited. So welcome, Bryan. Welcome to the crew here.
Well, I have to say I'm super happy to be here. I'm one of Scott's biggest fans and have been for 25 years probably now. So it's a real thrill. I've listened to I think every episode, if not close to it. So you guys are like not rock stars to me, kind of like annoying podcast guys.
Yeah,
but I'm a big fan, and I really enjoyed the first season. So I'm stoked to be on the show.
Well, I got to tell our audience here, when Bryan and I saw each other in San Diego a couple months ago, one of Bryan's feedback on D-Side Source is like, dude, you and Seth just agree on everything. Like what's going on? There's just not enough conflict. And I obviously agreed with Bryan. And I talked with Seth, and Seth and I are like, yeah, we do kind of like the same music. We kind of, we're just in this flow where it's like, yeah. And sometimes Seth and I will have our differences. So
I was going to say it's funny because off air we hate each other, so it's weird.
Dude, we never talk. We never hang out, Bryan. Just to tell you. But everyone, I wanted to introduce. This is a series that we have called D-Side Passes the Mic. And I wanted to introduce our good friend here, Bryan Pate. Bryan, let me just tell you about Bryan, okay? This guy, Stanford grad, Marine Corps, McKinsey consultant, CEO and founder of possibly the coolest company around, ElliptiGO. I tell you, everyone, if you get a chance, check out these bikes. I got to ride one in Tokyo. I'll just tell you, it was life-changing. Also, my college roommate, okay? So I just had to throw that in there. So Bryan, welcome.
Hey, so happy to be here. Really.
So when we talked about this, when Seth and I talked about this, we said, well, what kind of questions do we want? And we want a little bit of banter here. So Bryan, you've been listening to us season 1. What are the things that kind of came across? So, and you don't have to mention all the good things. You can go right into the bad.
No,
Seth,
I mean,
enough.
As you brought up, I mean, the first thing, it felt like I was sitting in a Harvard Business School class where everyone was piggybacking on each other's ideas. And, oh, that was a great, oh, I love the Beatles too. Oh my God, John's the best. So, the amount of support for each other, I think, was the first thing that jumped out at me. But in honesty, I really enjoyed how deep you guys go into sort of the nuances of music, and you always tie it back to the business element, which for me is interesting. I think it shows you guys come from real business chops. Which I know Scott does.
Kind of.
Seth, I'm not as sure. I'm not as sure about your business chops.
Man, I'm off the grid. I don't like to share too much about that kind of stuff, but Scott's back is strong from letting me piggyback him on his ideas. That's how we keep him in shape. Strong. He's an old man now.
That's how old man. No, definitely, Bryan. Some of the things that we talked about was some of the bands. Some of the bands that Bryan and I had some similarities, also with Seth, but a lot of differences.
Yes.
And I think, Seth, you wanted to get into the differences. Is that right? You wanted to actually have a little bit of tension here.
Yeah. So I will say, Bryan, like, I actually completely agree with your point, and it sort of
course you do.
With me. Yeah,
of course you do.
Listen, as this is
the agreement show.
I agree with everything. But like we come out of early on when we were doing this podcast, to go a little behind the curtain, there were times when we'd kind of do cuts throughout. Like now I think we're pretty good we have a good rapport, we've got a good flow. But we'd sometimes stop in the middle of it and just be like, that felt off or whatever. And we'd kind of cut in and out. And one of my big pushbacks early on was like, man, you can't just be like, yeah, that sounds great. I agree with you. That's not interesting content. And so it's kind of hard to put yourself out of your comfort zone. And so I think we've started to try to seek out topics that our opinions are a little less fully formed and crystallized, because I think that's where you see divergence. But it's definitely a thing that we think about quite a bit, and we want to make sure that we're being representative, given the fact that we're two middle-aged-ish white guys. So we're hyper aware of all the criticism that you're kind of sharing, and it comes from a place of like coming from the same background, being excited about what we've experienced and kind of sharing that. But I think the real interest in content comes from where that diverges, and I think that's where you come in, Bryan. So
well, I think what's fun is that your first, guy to push back, create a little diversity here is a middle-aged white dude.
we figured the best way to diversify this podcast is like,
Keep it the
what's the guy
same.
who looks most like us? Let's bring him in.
I'm going to say something
No.
about
The
let me say this
podcasting
about
traditions.
Scott's only half middle-aged.
yeah.
white
Let
guy.
me just talk about this.
Good
Yeah,
point.
Seth, you got to bring in my mom out there. Thank you, Mom, for bringing my Hispanic roots. But let me say something about Bryan. Okay, so I met Bryan. I mean, he's a straight-laced guy. I mean, he just looked like a sharpshooter. I walk into the room and I hear what I didn't know if it was a CD that had been broken, that was just skipping and on repeat. This was Bryan's music, punk music. And I remember going, oh my God, I have to live with this guy now. What is this music? And he's like, oh, dude, it's a Minor Threat. And I'm like, oh, I know it's a Minor Threat, but what is the band? Like, what is this? Bryan loves punk. And I was just so impressed. And so Bryan and I have bonded over music. And but some we haven't, and some of the bands I just want to bring it up. I mean, one that irks me, and that has throughout college, and I had to suffer through this. And I got to tell you, Dave Matthews Band.
Oh, dude,
let's just start off. Let's just go right into this, Bryan.
Yes. So how in the world could two white middle-aged dudes not be super appreciative of what Dave Matthews Band has brought to the world? Just like this is almost needs to be a therapy session for you guys, because clearly there's some sort of need you have to piss on great things.
Okay. Seth, I'm going to start here.
Please.
It may not be the I see Dave Matthews Band. These are the same type of fans that watch 2.5 Men, or these are the people that watch that guy. This is mass market that I just saw as it's not so bad and it's not so great. It's safe. I think that to me was something that I saw with Dave Matthews, especially some of the guys. And I thought this, Bryan, I'll be honest with you. I was surprised that you liked him, because in our, I can say, in a fraternity house. All right, let's just lay it out right there. Right, let's go all the way. It was music for people that didn't like music.
Yeah, that's what you say. I think he's the best lyricist of our generation.
I'm going to defer to Seth on this. Seth, I know you
bring it.
Well, I don't know that yeah, my third voice, and so I will preface with saying, like, I've got about a generation behind you guys, but to me, Dave Matthews Band, my issue is less with their music, because I don't disagree with you, Bryan. Like,
of course not.
I think I knew it was coming, baby. But I guess my thought was, I think my objection to them as a band is less about the music and more about the culture that surrounds it. I think, and I have not gone back and listened to the archives, but I think my take at the time was sort of like, the Grateful Dead sort of paved the way with the scene of people who follow the band and are really passionate about the live version of them versus the album version, which intrigued me. Yeah. But when the Grateful Dead were originally out, there wasn't MTV to just loop videos like they did for Dave Matthews Band. And that's how they kind of grew this passionate fan base of people, but they hadn't kind of made the initial investment into digging into the origin and the lore and the different versions of the band. So it was just like, you'd show up to a concert and there'd be a bunch of dipshits in cargo shorts. And so my issue was not with the music. It was more with the culture around Dave Matthews, or the lack thereof. And so, not to be like the snob about that, because I think to each their own, and whatever you like, you like. But I didn't have the intense resistance to it, or the reaction that Scott had. Mine was more like, this is a world that I don't know that I'm ready to dive into, because I'm not sure that I like the people who are also into it. That would be my
okay. All right. So I can respect that, Scotty.
This is what I found interesting, Bryan. You loved Minor Threat. You love the Descendants.
I like where this question is going. I like where it's going.
These are bands that represented Bryan Pate, which is disruptive, strong, courageous. All right. If I had to describe one of my good friends, that's Bryan Pate. I found Dave Matthews the antithesis of that. I thought it was safe.
Well. At least on
thought it was safe. It didn't make anyone go, man, that's scary. That's interesting. I can't. And I was like, Bryan, what? That was like one of our first fights. I was like, I don't understand this guy.
Yeah. So
how does that?
I like that. I like that pushback. I'll agree that there's no edge to Dave Matthews, like there's an edge to a Minor Threat or a Fugazi or Bad Religion. You were talking about Suffer, and I was like, oh, Suffer, one of the better albums from Bad Religion. But and there's a gosh, almost an energy that you get from how unrefined and hard those bands are. And I think there's a place for that for sure. And I'm a huge fan of punk and DC punk in particular. But I think Dave Matthews fills a need that is quite different from that. And so I think there's a real value to, again, he's more of, for me, it's more of a philosophical experience. It's a little bit more of like a meditation. It's like, I vividly remember being in Spain. And I hope my wife doesn't listen to this podcast, but I was in Spain hanging out with these girls and just playing the opening to Crash over and over. And it hit me. It was like, this is a fucking march. Like, this is like an old school march that you would play 200 years ago walking into battle. Like the whole opening scene of the drums in that, I'm like, unbelievable. Like, unbelievable. He took that style of music and made it into what I think is a great song, Crash. And the visualizations, again, for me, it's a lot of the lyrics. It's just like, and I could rattle it off, and I don't know that'd be helpful, but I think that just the way he paints what's going on and weaves the music into it is exceptional. And I think you can like punk music for one element and not have to have that replicated everywhere.
So that's kind of, actually, I'm glad you said it that way and framed it, Bryan, because I'm curious, like, what I was trying to tease out as you were talking was, is it these are two complementary things that can live on my Spotify together? Is it an evolution of your own taste? Is it like these two things tickle me in different ways, and I have a diverse enough palette where I can appreciate both as a complementary thing?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's funny because in listening to you guys, I think the three most consequential bands of our generation, me and Scott, Seth, your generation, I don't understand, so I can't make any commentary.
Nor do I.
But our generation, it was really, in my opinion, three bands. It was Dave Matthews, U2, and Metallica. And I think Metallica was the most musically gifted of those three bands. Like the actual chords and how they play music. Like there's a reason the San Francisco Symphony plays Metallica. Yeah. I think U2 was by far the most impressive band of our generation. And you guys bag on U2 also, and it blows my mind.
We're going to get there. It
blows my mind.
Because Scott, also, behind the scenes, Scott loved, like, there's certain albums Scott loves U2.
Yes,
he's been talking about Scott U2 for 15 years.
But then Dave Matthews, I feel like, from a lyrics standpoint, is just head and shoulders above both of those groups.
Let me say this. I totally agree with you, Bryan, that those three were probably the most influential. Okay, but let me tell you where I disagree.
Okay, please.
Okay. Are you ready? Dave Matthews, I think, to me, sucked from the start. They were so safe. It's like in business. Sometimes safe is just dangerous, right? And I felt them that I didn't cry. I didn't laugh. It was like, you'd almost say boring. Okay. That's just in my opinion. Metallica, my brother was into them in the 83, 84 and the Megaforce.
Kill it all.
I'll never forget listening to that. And Seth, you were a little young at that, but it was innovative.
It didn't exist, but yeah.
It was innovative. Okay. Mm-hmm. And U2 as well, I thought, had that post-punk sound in the early 80s. But I think what was heartbreaking about both of those bands is somehow I thought they got corrupted. And I almost think their later work,
not even talk about that.
I think what happened is it starts to dilute or even cause suspicion on their initial intentions. For example, Metallica started off, we're the outsider, right? We are the ones, and there's an anger about it. And we are disrupt. We're not like the sunset bands like Motley Crue. We don't wear spandex. We're just us. we go on stage with the clothes. Now you see them and they have tailored Levi's jackets. Everything is manicured. And it's like, there's a quote, I'll say it again, and I said it from Jim Morrison, who could also be insufferable. Once you make friends with the establishment, you are the establishment.
And I remember it, and this is before, sorry to interrupt you, Scott, but like this is even before, obviously I was super attuned to it, but I know kind of the story is Metallica had this huge following of people, and then they put out the Black Album, which was their most commercially successful, but it was also like, I wouldn't call that accessible, although it had hits on it, but a lot of their original fans were just like, fuck this band, they're selling out. I mean, they're still playing like speed metal basically, but because it has like melody to it and it has structure and it's 4 minutes long instead of 8, suddenly that is perceived as a sellout, and they've sort of pivoted into a commercial band.
Well, I mean, so the Black Album was a sellout. Rattle and Hum was a sellout for U2. I agree with that wholeheartedly. And this is coming from a guy whose football team left their town, right? And I will never forgive them. So there was a point in my life where I would never forgive Metallica for the Black Album and never forgive U2 for Rattle and Hum. But what I think is interesting is I've aged and grown and gained a little bit of wisdom and recognized that, hey, the Black Album was softer, it was gentler, it was, I think, way more accessible than Ride the Lightning, right? Which was, every song was about different ways to die. Literally different ways to die. Rick Rubin produced the Black Album. It was meant to be a commercial success, and those guys were truly cashing in. But I have to say, okay, like that's okay. Wherever I May Roam is a great song, flat out great song, And so I don't know why I can't appreciate their gifts and talent and creativity, what they brought to the world. Now I embrace that. I say, you know what? Wherever I May Roam, great song.
I hate to retread a topic that we've already touched on in a past episode, but this is, I think, particularly relevant for you guys versus me. And the concept of selling out. And let's do it in the frame of Metallica and what we're talking about now. That for, I may be on the old end of that, but for people my age and younger, that is not a thing. That is not controversial. The idea of being able to monetize something you're doing should not be perceived as negative. But U2 is always, or not U2, excuse me. REM is always the one that pops into my head. It's like hyper resistant to selling out. The labels they sign with, the songs they're allowed to license. Like, what is your opinion on the idea of selling out? What constitutes that? And how has your opinion on that evolved as you've gotten older and just sort of understood how the world works?
Yeah. I think it's a great question. I think that as a diehard young fan, where one of the appeals of the music is how you are differentiating yourself. Yeah. Like Scott mentioned, I was into DC punk. Well, part of that was because not that many people were into DC punk. And it was sort of a way to differentiate in my, teenage years, and it spilled over into my early 20s of kind of being different and edgy and trying to create a persona for myself. And I think that Metallica was very similar. It attracted a certain kind of individual that wanted to be on the outside, that thrived on being the outside. And so when Metallica became on the inside, they felt abandoned by their crew, their tribe. They felt abandoned by the leaders of their tribe. And so I think the definition for me in that context is trading your reputation for being independent and on the outside that you've built up over a period of time for commercial success. And I think that now that I'm 50, I look back and say, that's a smart thing to do. Like, that's a very smart thing to do for the individuals who are doing it. Mm-hmm. And the reality is they're not beholden to a bunch of high schoolers and college kids in terms of their artistic capabilities should be spread further and wider. And I think you look at a band like Fugazi, which was probably the most successful of the DC punk bands. They intentionally elected to never go mainstream. And I think that was a shame, because I think they would have helped to shape a narrative and shape been more influential in the culture. And I think they missed out on that.
Do you think they would have found a broader audience, or do you think that 100%. Would have been would that have required a change in their sound, or no? It's a matter of how big your broadcast net is.
That's a really good question. I think, and this is why I think, Rick Rubin's a genius for sure. Because he was able to thread that needle, I think, really well with the Black Album. And I think that if Fugazi had tried to do it themselves, so to speak, I don't know if it would have been successful. And if you look at Green Day, very similar, right? A band that was in Berkeley, like when we were contemporaries of ours in college, right?
Yeah.
They had 1039 Happy Hours or whatever, and Kerplunk. Yeah. Great albums. And they took what was the song they took from Kerplunk and put onto Dookie? Was it oh shit, I can think of it in my head. Anyway,
I wish I had this up, man. We need a researcher for season 3.
Yeah, it's actually one of the top songs off Dookie was a song from Kerplunk, which I think was the previous album, and they remastered it. And it became a huge hit. I don't think it's as big of a hit if it stays Kerplunk style. I think there is something about, and I don't think Rick Rubin did that album, but there's something about having a great producer just massage the corners to bring something from the outside, I think, to the inside.
And it almost feels, sorry, the last thing I want to say, I don't know why this just popped into my brain, and I'll let you go, Scott, but it almost reminds me of, and again, this is a throwback to a thing we talk a lot about, but like Brian Epstein putting the Beatles in suits, where it's like they didn't change the songs, but like you've got something there, but we got to be able to market it. We got to put this in a package that we can go and sell. And they go from guys who are wearing, toilet bowl seats on their necks during concerts because it's funny, to all wearing matching suits. They're playing the same songs, and all of a sudden their appeal blows up and they're marketable, whether you're going to Germany, whether you're whatever. It's a subtle tweak that's someone from the outside sees there's something here. How do we kind of spit shine this diamond? And I think that felt a lot of the bands that sold out really was about that. It was spit shining the diamond.
Yeah.
And I look at business. I mean, even look at D-Side Stories. There's things that we've done that try to gauge more people. This is a perfect example. So I see nothing wrong with trying to reach an audience. I just think when some of the core tenets that you built it upon, if those change, it's almost like I wish Metallica had just rebranded, said, hey, we were angry and this was our equity, just like a product. Now, we've evolved, but it's different. We don't have the same situation. We can't write the same songs.
But that's what U2 did, and it seems like that doesn't resonate with you.
No, but I thought U2 after Rattle and Hum, and I told Seth this. One of my top 3 albums of all time is Achtung Baby. And I think for any any U2 hater, they have to respect that album. And I thought it was courageous, it was disruptive, and it was fascinating. And then I thought, they came back with All That You Can't Leave Behind. And that's when I thought I don't know if they got tired.
Didn't they come back with Zooropa?
Well, after Zooropa, right? It was kind of that, almost like
Zooropa. All That You Can't Leave Behind, I want to say, was late.
It was later.
I think,
But that's when I saw them. It was almost like when the Rolling Stones released Some Girls. I felt like it was like, okay, we're kind of, we're older now. We can kind of make songs that are a little more palpable and get a wide audience. And that's when I felt the music suffered. And that's when I started to see like Metallica. I just didn't find them interesting. I thought it was just a different band. And I think if they labeled it a different band, it would have been like, oh, Metallica was pure. Like I like the purity of some bands. And I think that's when they mix. And I even know with let me give you an example with my mom. She was like, oh, I like the Beatles until they did those drugs,
It feels like it goes with, it's like the punk time. It's the punk rock ethos of like, don't trust anybody over 30, right?
Yeah.
To me, it all comes back to that, is at a certain point, whether it's age, whether it's money, whether it's influence, it very rarely does a band make their best album on their 7th album. That's just not how it works. And so whether you call it selling out, or whether you call it evolution, or whether you just call it like losing touch with the thing that inspired you to do the music that resonated with people to begin with, like that's inevitable. And so I don't know that you fault a band for evolving in that way.
But isn't that amazing? Because you said the band doesn't make its best music on the 7th album. What number album was Octung Baby? I think it was 6.
It was
6,
later,
not 7.
No,
okay.
But I listen. That's a great point.
Again, back to U2. I mean, I think U2. I'm just shocked you guys are not as enamored with U2 as you are with the Beatles. I mean, here's 4 guys in the middle of Ireland who meet in high school. They met in high school, formed a band in high school. 45 years later, like they're selling out stadiums still. And they started off as a punk band.
Yeah.
They made a movie, which was a disaster. I mean, Rattle and Hum was just a horrible, horrible thing. And they recovered from it, right?
No,
they recovered from it and continued to iterate and change and adapt. And they're still the same 4 guys. Name another organization that has the same 4 guys in it 45 years later that started in high school. Business.
It's Jack Welch shit. I know it's true.
No, listen, these guys, I just think what troubles me is that they build upon something, right? And they have the right to evolve, just like any human, right?
Yeah.
But there's something with, they're selling an image. And the image is built on, you said it, Bryan, it's built on these equities, right? Like this brand, hey man, this is a new brand and we're all about this. And then somehow that starts to change and they evolve. And I see them alienating that initial. It's kind of like you abandoned me. I think there's a great meme that I saw that shows James Hetfield, lead singer of Metallica, and he's outside Louis Vuitton in on Rodeo Drive in Los Angeles, and they show him carrying a bag, and they show his fan in like jeans and leather, and one's smiling and one's not. And I thought that was I thought it told a story. And I when I saw Bono meeting at a VC, he invested in Facebook, made millions off of Facebook, and said, hey, you can do good, but you can also be a smart businessman. It's that logic. That's why I think Jim Morrison said that. You become the establishment. You claim to be from here, but now you're here and you're still singing these songs.
But aren't they authentic like that? Like, I think that's why U2 is probably the most authentic of all, because they started off as a band during the Troubles, right? Or at the very tail end of the Troubles, right?
Yeah.
And they're there dealing with it, and they're pissed off about it. And Boy and October are 2 of the most angry albums you'll ever hear. The 3rd album was War. I mean, it's a pretty angry situation.
I love that.
They're not mad anymore, right? And they admitted that. They like sort of embraced that as they aged and moved out of Ireland. Yeah. And now they're basically citizens of the world, and they don't concern themselves with the Catholics and the Protestants.
No, it's almost maybe like a branding. And then obviously, Seth and I have come from the branding world, and Bryan, you lead a brand. It's almost like, hey, you need a sub brand, or this is U2, the Happy Years, or this is like, I know with like Ziggy Star, like people say, oh, I love David Bowie in the Ziggy years. And they'll even call out these very finite periods because they wanted you to know, I don't like his commercial days. I like him here, or I like Metallica pre-Black Album, and people, because it's hard. They're trying to reconcile, like, I like them, but I don't like them. And I think
that's define an era, right? Like I almost think even like it goes back to
even though it's
Sinatra, the Capitol years. It's like I like the old stuff. Like people have been digging for how do I want to say it? Like if something becomes uncool, which ultimately inevitably it does, how do you still like it but not lose your own credibility? And so you kind of reach for like, oh, I like their early stuff. Like that's like almost the joke, right? Yeah. But you try to you try to find the thing that you latched onto originally, but dismiss the later stuff, or whenever they pivoted away from, whether it's a financial sellout thing or just the sound changed. That is what most people search for, but then it evolves into like, I hate U2, which is hilarious that you brought it up, Bryan, because when I think of Scott, I'm like, oh, Scott loves U2. Like, what are we talking about?
I did this all for Bryan.
Yeah.
And we hate Nickelback too, just to say.
I'm on board with hating Nickelback. Okay. I'm on board with hating Nickelback.
I want to be the podcast contrarian and say I love them now, but I don't know if I can go all. I don't know if I can swing that far.
I want to say I read a statistic that said most people that hate Nickelback can't name a song, which I think is
100% true. I couldn't name a song. The Nickelback could walk in my house tonight, I would have no idea who they were.
I'd be like, oh, you got some ramen for dinner. Oh no, that's
I don't know if there's 2 of them or 12 of them.
Oh,
I don't know if they're white or black. I have no idea.
They're from Canada. They're very white. So I'll start you there.
We're just about out of time here. So Bryan, is there anything you wanted to ask us or anything you wanted to say to the audience? Anything you wanted to share?
And
No,
to be
first
clear, the audience is you. So just
Yeah,
you're
no, it's
talking to
great.
yourself.
I can't wait to listen to this. Actually, I don't think I've listened to a podcast I've been on, so this will be the first one.
You're gonna be great.
Neither have I.
Well, you're not missing much.
Yeah, I know.
But no, seriously, this is a real treat. It really is. It's, Scott, you're one of my favorite people, and Seth, I feel like it's funny. I feel like I know who you are, and I had this picture of you in my head, and then you pop up here on video, and I was like, that looks nothing at all like Seth. Who the hell is this guy?
That's an interesting.
But your voice is the same. Your voice is the same. It's very odd.
It's such an odd experience because, again, it's so funny you say that. This has been such an insular world for Scott and I to sort of be in this little bubble. And obviously, we've relatively recently done the YouTube thing where people can see our faces, but it does feel like sometimes we're shouting into an echo chamber. And so to have you on and have you join us, Bryan, and kind of feel like one of the gang, and also like seemingly like you've actually listened to this stuff, it's really thrilling for us and for me at least. So cool to have you, and so cool to have you challenge us, because again, we're sick of patting each other on the back. So I'm glad this
Stop
new
with the
era
pat on the
of
back.
adversarial relationships among podcast hosts. That's what we're shooting for.
Bryan, thank you so much, buddy. I just want to say we really enjoy this, and to our audience here, again, this is Bryan Pate. Check out his company, ElliptiGO. It is hard to invent something new in this world, right? We talk about music, we talk about art. It is truly hard to bring something 100% new to market. And I can proud to say that's what my roommate did. And actually, because I room with Seth as well, I have to say, Bryan, I have to be specific there.
Yes, true.
Somehow we've all been roommates, but thank you, Bryan, for bringing that amazing product to the market. And everyone, listen, have a fantastic week. Again, we are super stoked for season 2, and we'll see you soon.
Good deal. Thank you for joining us, Bryan.
Thanks, Bryan.
Thank you, guys. No,
all right. See you guys.